Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and in today's episode, we're going to be taking a close look at A Contract with God by Will Eisner in its Curator's Collection edition. If you're not familiar with A Contract with God, check out my introductory What is A Contract with God video, in which I talk about the legacy of this classic comic. And I also have a comparison of 4 different editions in which this story has previously been published, also linked up here in the description below. To that, today we're adding a look at this possibly definitive edition of the book. This is a box set comprising 2 hardcover volumes, each volume reproducing the entire collection of short stories that makes up this landmark comic. Volume 1 gives you the pencils of each and every page, or almost each and every page of this collection, and Volume 2 gives you the inks. In this way, this 2-volume set is actually 2 gallery editions or artist editions, those editions of comics that reproduce the original art, but giving you the entire process twice over by having the pencils separate from the inks. It does focus, as I said, on the original art, so you shouldn't consider either of these volumes a finished book. It really is an album of original art. It's more like looking at a portfolio of the pages that Will Eisner composed and created in the process of publishing this book. But I really found in particular his inks to be so clean and so polished that you might as well be reading a finished produced book. These volumes are gorgeously produced. Thick hardcovers with cloth spines, an elegant minimalistic design on the back, and a detail both in the pencil form and the final ink form to distinguish the volumes on the front covers. This slipcase itself is also a very handsome product. It's extremely sturdy and thick. The front has a work-in-progress inks page of a piece of art that Will Eisner had created for a collected edition. And even on the box, you can see whiteout not being used for corrections, but for highlighting the image, an indicator of the kind of artwork this edition puts on display. The back of the slipcase is a reproduction of a watercolor that Will Eisner did, again, for a particular edition of this collection. And the beauty and the handsomeness of this slipcase is just magnified by the fact that it has a cloth spine and cloth top and cloth bottom, something I've never seen on a slipcase before. Volume 1 is the pencils and features all 4 of the short stories in A Contract with God in their original pencil format. This includes the pencils of special pages he created for future editions, pencils of the introduction that he had illustrated and written about before the stories began, as well as pencils of the sections that start each story. I love looking at original art, and I really love looking at pencils because it shows you how rough or how clean different artists are, where they start from compared to where they get. And over here you can see that this is reproduced in a very pleasing style. The entire page is scanned, so you see the slug marks or the crop marks, you see where the trim and the bleed will go. In the initial pages, at least, these pages do differ in style. Not all of them have this format. For example, these 2 don't. And these comics pages are marked with Poorhouse Press, which was actually Will Eisner's self-publishing effort in order to help Baronet bring this book out. Something that's common in classic pencils pages is this blue pencil. As one of the essays in this book talks about, this blue pencil doesn't photocopy, so it doesn't need to be erased once the final pencils have been made and the page is going to be scanned. And I love the sensation that these blue pencils create in art like this, where you can see the art take shape where it could have been until the final decisions were made. This kind of ghostly wobble of where the comic could have been but for millimeters has always been a very thrilling experience for me to read. And this does not disappoint in that regard. These are superlative scans that contain that sort of aged paper feel because of the contrast against the white margins. And these display a lot of art and text that was tweaked before its final form. Even between the blue and the gray pencils, you can see different word choices being made. And of course, these will change even further when we get to the inks. And that's particularly true for the writing, which is tightened up and edited between this and the final version. But the art itself is very fully formed at the pencils. I know some artists have roughs, so their pencils don't don't really resemble the final piece more than being layouts or positioning, whereas this definitely feels like much tighter pencils. Alongside the observation of where the language has changed, where style changes, sometimes you have things written in all caps in pencils, which in the final form are in regular sentence case. And sometimes you can see smudgy erasure of the gray pencils in repositioning things as well. These high-resolution scans include tape, and you can tell that these pages were created to be scanned and to be printed, something that really interests me. These days, I think people take a lot of care with original art if they are putting it down on paper at all. But in earlier classic comics, they seem to have been treated as a means to an end. This was never envisioned to be a valuable collector's item or anything like that. This was merely what was needed in order to create the book. Still, these pages seem to have been very well taken care of. Every now and then you'll see a folded corner like this over here, but I don't think I've seen any rips and tears on any of these pages. In some cases, the original pages weren't actually scanned before being sold off. There is a note on that as well. So instead, you'll have pages like this one. I'm assuming this is something that was sold before it could have been properly scanned. So you get a scan of the final product, absolutely clean of any lines like this, but still presented in that sepia sort of tone to keep the story feeling consistent. This volume is very well bound with sewing that seems to be very tight, and it has a wonderful printed cloth spine. The 4 stories that make up A Contract with God have bookends, little testimonials from comics creators talking about how influential Will Eisner and this book was to their work. In volume 1, you have such small testimonials from Vivek J. Tiwari, the author of The Fifth Beatle, Stan Sakai of Usagi Yojimbo, Mark Schultz, Steve Rude, Trina Robbins, and Howard Cruz. It starts with an autobiographical introduction by Frank Miller, has a note on this book by the designer and editor of this volume, John Lind, and an essay at the end of the volume by Dennis Kitchen in which he points out several of the most significant adjustments made between the pencils and the final form of A Contract with God. This includes highlighting the fact that in the pencils, the actual contract was something given to readers, something that was replaced before printing by just an image, and the contract was sort of left up to the imagination instead of being spelled out for us. There are a number of such changes, including a more graphic suicide in the story The Super, the splitting of one page into 2 separate pages from Cuckoline, as well as completely abandoning this one page from The Super in which he sort of spelled out that he was a Nazi, something that isn't really needed for the story to have its power, as well as things that look like small editorial changes but make a significant difference to the story. The thing that one wants to do after having gone through the pencils is obviously immediately move on to the inks and compare what we just saw while it's fresh in our minds on a panel-by-panel basis. Volume 2, the inks, gives us the inked form of the frontispiece that we saw in pencil form in the earlier volume, and follows to give us each page of the book again on inks. In an essay in this book, it is explained to us that Will Eisner used a layer of vellum over his pencils, so it was almost like tracing on top of his pencils, but on a separate surface, which is why the pencils and inks can coexist. And there's also an explanation of how these thick inks makes the vellum shrink up, something that you can see in these high-resolution scans. Each of these pages seems wet and wrinkled in comparison. The inks over here are superb, and what you also see is the development of the lettering, something that was much rougher in the pencils, and you see Will Eisner editing himself between pencils and inks by making the writing shorter and snappier, by getting rid of redundancies, and by changing the positioning of things to affect the dramatic pacing. Once again, this is just marvelous reproduction of the inks. You really feel as if you've got the page right here in front of you. And little scribbles and notes, the edges of tape are all wonderfully reproduced. Here's that full page, which was actually done by a paste up like we saw in the last volume, covering up where the original had a contract spelled out. Many of these pages you can see are composites of separately inked or traced images that have then been put together to make one final page, even though the pencils had them as one image. Similar to the pencils page, you do have the occasional page which I'm guessing the art was not available for this high-res scanning. They are few and far between. This is one of them. But looking at that final page right next to an inked page, you can see that the inks are so clean that you can, as I was saying, read this as if it was a final book. Just like you had blue pencil in the pencils volume, you've got a lot of whiteout in the inks volume. But not all of it is for corrections like over here. Very often it's used for things like lightning and water to add shine to these telephone wires. Once again, we get the art of each of the 4 stories with the occasional scanned page, and this ends up being a terrific testament to Will Eisner's achievements. Like in the first volume, this one also contains testimonials, including ones from Jeff Smith, Nate Powell, Sergio Aragonés, and Paul Levitz. Alongside all the pages, we also have a lot of extras, some of which have appeared in previous editions and some of which I've never seen before. This includes covers of various editions in different languages, reproductions of the original art that created the covers and back covers of certain editions, chapter ending pages, and frontispieces designed by Will Eisner. The 2 big essays in this volume, alongside the reproductions and artwork from earlier editions, there is a mini biography of Will Eisner by Dave Gibbons, a note by editor and designer John Lind, again on the process of creating a contract with God across the pencils and the inks, and notes on the ancillary images collected in this edition, both in this volume as well as the earlier pencils volume. All in all, I think this is a fantastic edition. Although a little expensive, it is completely worth it for fans of Will Eisner and in particular A Contract with God, curating as it sets out to do the entire history of this particular project as well as the context of the creator and what he was trying to do. The write-ups, in particular the long detailed ones, are all the background you really need about the creator and the work, and gives you a true sense of the significance of the achievement. Although neither of these volumes is the finished printed book, I think it could be said that this is the definitive version of the book, staying true to the original vision while giving you this larger deluxe format, giving you the scholarship, and giving you this superb reproduction of the original art in such a way as to create a sense of owning a portfolio of every single page of this book. The Curator's collection of A Contract with God, I think, is an absolute triumph. I hope you enjoyed this look at this special edition of a seminal comic. This has been For the Love of Comics. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.